Now, it's estimated that half of South Africa's urban population lives in townships and informal settlements, accounting for 37% of working-age citizens, but home to roughly 60% of the unemployed. The World Bank suggests that only 25% of money generated in the townships is spent there. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by economist Trudy Makaya. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. First, why do you think there's such little spend, and what is that spend on?
So that spend tends to be on small-scale retail and also on some services, hairdressing and activities like that. You know, when we look at townships, of course, they have a lot of potential and a lot of households with some income. The problem is that the infrastructure does not lend itself to production in the township, so that you don't have enough goods and services that are produced within those townships, and people then have to go outside to meet their needs. You know, we don't have manufacturing in townships. We don't necessarily have the more advanced retail, so you find people always having to go to spend their money elsewhere instead of spending on what could be produced internally.
The Gauteng Economic Development MEC Lebogang Maile has been speaking quite a lot about the revitalization of the township economy and pushing for things to happen there. Are you seeing any difference now, or how long do we have to wait to see a difference?
Well, there is some difference. So you see a lot of initiatives trying to give people in townships, entrepreneurs, financing. You're starting to see initiatives around property, you know, giving access to space. So I think those will make a difference. Unfortunately, I think it will take some time because, you know, the scale of investment that's necessary to really make manufacturing in townships a reality, for instance, is quite massive. And also some of the conditions, you know, crime actually is more of a township problem than anywhere else. And so dealing with those kinds of business environment issues is also important going forward. So there is some investment, but it just needs to be scaled up. And I think some of the less obvious or less directly business issues, such as crime, need to be addressed before we can see significant production.
Now, you've said that in the current economic climate, there is a space and a way to look at townships as investment hotspots?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm saying that you need massive investment to get the production going, so to get the factories going. You know, for instance, you know, in the previous regime, we used to have heavily subsidized factories in outskirts, in places like Hammanskraal, in places like Industria in Johannesburg. But you find that a lot of them have struggled in the face of Chinese competition, globalization. And so you need massive investment to get that production going. You need to ensure that international investors can also see these sites as places where they can access workers and facilities. You know, we're seeing an opportunity where China, for instance, itself is shifting away from certain types of manufacturing as wages rise and as they focus on local consumption. And as South Africa, we can be the manufacturing hub for some of the products that they no longer want to manufacture. But to do that, we have to get our costs right and we have to get our infrastructure right. And we shouldn't assume that this has to happen in CBDs. Townships also have a role to play in that.
How long would you say, if all these factors were put in place and township entrepreneurs were encouraged, would we be able to see this manufacturing and this activity to revitalize the economy?
Well, I mean, it's hard to put, you know, an exact time frame to it. I think there are important initiatives that are already underway. I think a lot of this has to do with learning by doing. So over time, you find that with scale and with capabilities being developed, you'll see more production. You also need to see more people taking risks in terms of investing long-term in township enterprises. It can't be a very small scale or a very short-term kind of investment. People have to start thinking about the 10-year, 15-year, 20-year investments. You do see it in some industrial parks. For instance, you know, you have, you know, food manufacturing companies, tire manufacturing companies in some of these parks, but these are long-term investments. They can't be seen in the same mold of small-scale light manufacturing or just small-scale spaza-type retail.
Okay. I just want to come out of the township economy and go to a briefing that our Deputy Finance Minister held at Gibbs a little bit earlier on. He says that the 3 to 6% inflation target band used by the Reserve Bank to decide on interest rates should be debated. What do you think of this statement?
It should be debated. I mean, it's a number that we have. It's a target we've had since, I think, late 90s, early 2000s. So, of course, economic conditions change. It should be up for debate. I think what's dangerous is when people start saying we can let go of inflation targeting, or that inflation is not harmful, that you have a problem. So I think we will have to see and agree that inflation has to be managed. You can't have prices spiraling out of control. We've seen hyperinflation in places like Zimbabwe, Germany before the Second World War. That's not what we want. We want price stability. At the same time, we can't just stick with a target that we've had for many, many years without reviewing it. So from that perspective, I think on a principle level, we can say we want to manage prices, but at what level? And what is the trade-off between keeping prices low and growth? So you don't want a reserve bank that is aggressively going after inflation, raising interest rates, for instance, or not lowering them when it's appropriate, and taming inflation, but then growth suffers at the same time. So there's got to be a trade-off to say, maybe we can take a little bit more inflation if we can protect growth. So, I think that's kind of where the debate should be going. But I don't think it's an either-or situation, scrap inflation targeting, or inflation doesn't hurt the poor, which of course it does. At the same time, you can't ignore growth. You can't say that, and already it's a secondary mandate of the Reserve Bank to say, we will institute monetary policy that will keep inflation stable, but as a secondary mandate, we also have to look at growth. We also have to be careful about which tools you give to which institution. You can't have the Reserve Bank doing everything. I think this is the other consideration.
You also spoke about a need for investment in our GDP to grow at a much bigger rate than it is. Is it feasible, given that business confidence in South Africa is very low at the moment, and given our current economic climate?
We've had targets around investment, 25% savings rate, 30% rate of investment in the economy. That is what we need. I mean, that is not debatable. You need business confidence for that to happen. You need government also investing, and you do see that in recent years, government has had to pull back because it doesn't have the resources. So we need to think carefully, where does government get the tax revenue to enable it to invest appropriately alongside the private sector?
Trudy Makaya, thanks very much for your time on SABC News.